If we were to step back for a moment and take a good long look at the history of our own lives, whether it's over 20, 40, 60, maybe even 80 years, what we realize is that there are certain moments, certain experiences that can happen to us that can change the direction of our life forever. We've all had them. Encounters, births, deaths, crises, tragedies, surprises. And unbeknownst to us at the time, these moments bring with them new paths for our lives. A path we may have never have otherwise traveled, and they affect our entire life. Well, we have just such a moment in the life of the rich man in today's gospel reading. Jesus is about to set out on a journey when suddenly a man runs up before him, kneels down, and asks what is perhaps the most important of all questions, the question we all seek an answer to: what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, little did the rich man know, but the words that would be forthcoming would change his life forever. It would never be the same again. Just try to imagine for a moment what it would be like to kneel before the Lord and to see him look down upon you with love in his eyes, and in that look know that we are seeing the face of God. Would it evoke fear and trembling, wonder and awe? Would we be overwhelmed with joy? Would we be speechless or overcome with tears? We just heard that look described in our Old Testament reading from the book of Wisdom. I preferred that look to scepter and throne. I deemed riches nothing in comparison, far beyond health, far beyond beauty. I chose that look rather than light, because all good things came to me in that look. In our second reading from the book of Hebrews, we hear a similar refrain. That look is living and effective, sharper than any two-edged sword. It cuts to the heart, and in it we know ourselves. And so this rich man kneeling before Jesus eagerly awaits his response to the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Well, Jesus' response would come as no surprise to anyone. He quotes the commandments. You shall not kill, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not defraud, honor your father and your mother. Very familiar words to us. And seemingly rather proud of himself, the rich man says, all of these things I have done since my youth. And you can just imagine him thinking to himself, yes, I'm in. But then Jesus continues, but you are lacking one thing. Go sell what you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. And notice how poignantly that moment is described. It says, at that statement, his face fell, and he went away sad, for he had many possessions. How could Jesus have known? How could Jesus have read his heart and mind? How could he have known that his riches were the one thing he simply could not part with? And knowing himself only too well, and yet having the integrity to be honest, the rich man walked away sad. So what lesson is Jesus imparting here? Not only to the rich man, but to his disciples, to those who were there. And what lesson is he imparting to us some 2,000 years later? And what is important to note here is that this is only one of many occasions on which Jesus addresses the dangers of riches, the lure of wealth, and the desire for earthly possessions. And so we look at today's story in alignment with all the other things that Jesus says about possessions and riches. First of all, riches and possessions in and of themselves are not evil. Rather, it is our inordinate desire for them or our preoccupation with them that can become evil. Secondly, Worldly riches can create a false sense of security and independence, that we can control our own destiny, that we can buy our way out of sorrow and sadness and life's challenges, or that happiness and fulfillment in life is something that can be bought. Thirdly, prosperity knits a man to the world. Prosperity knits a woman to the world. And for this point, I would like to use an illustration. There's a story told about a renowned diamond expert who was traveling from the United States to Europe. On the plane, he was seated in first class, and in the seat next to him was a well-dressed, middle-aged woman who was wearing a huge diamond ring, so huge that it immediately got his attention. And being the diamond aficionado that he was, he couldn't take his eyes off her ring. Well, not long after takeoff, not being able to contain himself any longer, the man introduced himself to the lady and said, "I couldn't help but notice your beautiful ring. I deal in precious stones for a living. Would you mind telling me about your diamond?" And showing no irritation whatsoever, and raising her hand so they both could gaze upon it, she graciously replied, "Well, this is the famous Klopman diamond, one of the largest diamonds in the world." And the man said, "Oh, the Klopman diamond, of course. It's absolutely stunning." And they both sat there for a moment, admiring her beautiful diamond ring. Well, then the woman broke the silence and said, "But I must tell you, sir, there's a terrible curse that comes along with this precious stone." And now the man was really interested, and he said, "Really, what's the curse?" And as he waited with bated breath, she replied, "Mr. Klopman." If one's priorities and primary interests are bound to material things, it becomes increasingly unlikely that you will aspire to things that are spiritual or sacred or lofty or noble. Jesus did not condemn material things or call them evil. It is our inordinate preoccupation with or pursuit of them that becomes the problem, because enough is never enough. And that can become an insidious, oftentimes vicious cycle. Fourth and finally, when our eyes are fixated on the pursuit of riches and possessions, we can become blind to the plight of the poor, the less fortunate, and the vulnerable. Those in need are of little or no concern when wealth is seen as something to be hoarded and protected rather than generously shared. By way of conclusion, we mustn't think for a moment that the lesson Jesus was imparting here is directed only toward those who possess great wealth or possessions. There can be a number of things that we are clinging to that keep us from following Christ as a true disciple. There are a number of things that we can put before Him. It may be possessions, but it may be something totally different. It could be some other preoccupation we have. Maybe it's a habit, an addiction, or some other destructive behavior that we are struggling with. It may be an unhealthy relationship, an obsession we have with someone. Perhaps it's a place you go, the company you keep, an activity you engage in. Only we know for ourselves what that might be. And like the rich man, we might be keeping all the commandments and doing all sorts of other good things, even holy things, but we can rest assured it is that one thing that we may be clinging to so tightly that we're unable to let go of that will be our undoing. We can never underestimate the power of God's transforming love, nor the compassion and mercy with which He looks down upon our weaknesses. But for our part, we must continually seek to become the best version of ourselves that we can possibly be. Strive for spiritual excellence, because only then will we begin to see and feel and taste and touch the abundant life that God has intended for each of us. For nothing is impossible for God.